In the river-kissed streets of Ikorodu, they say a woman's tongue once burned down a family faster than any fire. She never struck a match, she never raised a fist, but by the time the sun set on that Thursday evening, her words had done what no enemy could: destroyed trust, shattered reputation, and turned neighbor against neighbor. Her name was Mrs. Morenike Ajibola, and this is the story of how she learnt that some silences are louder than screams. Before we continue with what happened next, if you are finding this story compelling, consider subscribing. We post new African stories every week, and your support allows us to keep bringing you these deeply interesting stories. Now, back to the story. Ikorodu was never quiet. The roads were narrow, but the noise was wide. Downfall conductors shouted destinations like war crimes. Okada riders revved their engines at every corner. And gossip moved faster than all of them combined. In the heart of this noise lived Mrs. Morenike Ajibola, a woman whose voice could be heard 3 compounds away. She was not wicked, she was not cruel, but her mouth, as the elders would say, had no resting place. Mrs. Ajibola sold provisions from a blue kiosk that leaned slightly to the left and never locked properly. Sugar, salt, matches, Maggi cubes, peak milk, everything a household needed. But people didn't come just for provisions. They came for stories. And Mrs. Ajibola always had stories. She would tell you about her husband snoring that shook the ceiling fan, about the pastor's new shoes that cost more than 3 months' offering, about the neighbor who owed her 2,000 naira since December, about the quiet tears she cried after childbirth when the nurses went looking. To Mrs. Ajibola, silence was not golden, it was suspicious. Talking was breathing, and she breathed deeply, constantly, endlessly. Children nicknamed her Radio Ajibola. Women laughed and leaned in closer when she spoke. Men shook their heads but still lingered to hear the end of her tales. Her husband, Mr. Bayodun Ajibola, was the opposite, a quiet electrician who fixed wires and avoided drama. He loved his wife, but sometimes late at night he would sigh and say, "Morenike, not every thought needs a voice." She would laugh and kiss his forehead. "But Bayodun, if I don't talk, who will know what I'm thinking?" That, he would reply softly, is sometimes the point. But Mrs. Ajibola did not hear him. Or perhaps she heard but did not understand. Not yet. In Yoruba culture, there is a saying, "Ẹnu ló ń pa èèyàn, kì í ṣe idà." The mouth kills a person, not the sword. Mrs. Ajibola was about to learn this the hard way. It was a Thursday, the kind of hot, sticky Thursday where even the flies moved slowly. Mrs. Ajibola was arranging tin tomatoes when a woman approached, Mrs. Folake, a member of the local cooperative society. Mrs. Folake was not the chatty type. She was educated, refined, the kind of woman who wore her gele even to the market. But that afternoon, her face was tight with worry. "Sister Morenike," she said quietly, glancing around, "can I trust you?" Mrs. Ajibola straightened immediately, her heart swelling. Trust. That word was honey to her ears. "Of course, Sister Folake, you know me. What I hear stays with me." Mrs. Folake hesitated, then leaned in close. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Our cooperative, we gave a loan to the Olanrewaju family. Their business is failing. They begged us not to tell anyone. Shame, you understand. But they've missed 2 payments. The elders are planning to seize their shop next week." Mrs. Ajibola's eyes widened. The Olanrewajus, but they always act like they are doing well. "That's why it's a secret," Mrs. Folake said firmly. "Please, don't mention this to anyone. I'm only telling you because, well, you know everyone. If you hear anything that could help them, let me know quietly." Mrs. Ajibola nodded vigorously. My lips are sealed, sister, sealed like a padlock. Mrs. Folaki smiled weakly, paid for a tin of milk and left. Mrs. Ajibola sat back down, her mind already racing. The Olanrewa Jews, struggling, a secret. She had no intention of spreading it, but intention, as the elders say, is not the same as action. That evening, Mrs. Ajibola's husband came home late from a wiring job. She was restless. The secret sat in her chest like a stone. She decided to take a walk. On the main road, she passed Uncle Taju's beer parlor. A few men were drinking and arguing about football. One of them, Mr. Gbenga, waved at her. Mama Ajibola, come, settle this argument. Is it Manchester or Arsenal that will win? She laughed and stopped. Me, I don't watch football. Then what do you watch? Another man teased. The whole of Ikorodu. They all laughed. Mrs. Ajibola laughed too, but her pride was pricked. I don't watch people, she said, sitting at the edge of a bench. But I hear things, and some of the things I hear, it will shock you. Mr. Gbenga leaned forward, grinning. Like what? She hesitated. Then, as if the words had a will of their own, she said, You know the Olariwa Jews, the ones with the big shop near the roundabout. Yes, fine people, always well-dressed. Mrs. Ajibola lowered her voice. Well, I just heard, oh, I'm not saying it's true, that their business is not as fine as it looks. The men leaned in. What do you mean? I heard they owe the cooperative big money, and if they don't pay soon, she trailed off, shaking her head dramatically. The men exchanged glances. Chai, is that so? I'm just saying what I heard, Mrs. Ajibola said quickly, standing up. Don't quote me, oh. But it was too late. The seed was planted. By the next morning, the story had grown legs. At the market, a woman selling vegetables whispered to another woman selling fish. The fish seller told the woman who sold rice. The rice seller mentioned it to the tailor. The tailor's apprentice told his mother. His mother told the landlord. Each time the story passed from mouth to mouth, it changed shape. The Olanrewa Jews are bankrupt. They are selling their shop. They've been lying to everyone. They owe money to half of Ikorodu. And every version somehow traced back to one source. Mrs. Ajibola said it. Mrs. Ajibola herself had no idea. She went about her day, selling provisions, chatting with customers, but she noticed something strange. Fewer people were stopping by. The women who usually lingered to gist now bought quickly and left. Some didn't even greet her. She brushed it off. Maybe they are busy. On Friday afternoon, Mrs. Olanrewaju came. She was a tall, graceful woman, usually quick to smile, but that day her face was stone. Mrs. Ajibola. Her voice was cold. Mrs. Ajibola looked up, startled. Sister Olanrewaju, of afternoon. How is? Don't greet me. The kiosk seemed to shrink. Mrs. Olanrewaju stepped closer. Her voice was low, trembling with controlled rage. Why did you do it? Mrs. Ajibola blinked. Do what? My business, my family, my reputation. You told the whole of Ikorodu that we are broke, that we owe money, that we are liars. Mrs. Ajibola's stomach dropped. I didn't. Don't lie to me. Mrs. Olanrewaju's voice cracked. People are pointing at my children in school. My husband's friends won't look him in the eye. Customers are leaving us because they think we are going under. And it all started with you. Tears filled Mrs. Olanrewaju's eyes, but she did not let them fall. We trusted this community. We were trying to rebuild quietly. But you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Mrs. Ajibola's hands trembled. Sister, I only mentioned it to 1 or 2 people. I didn't mean... You didn't mean? Mrs. Olanrewaju's laugh was bitter. Do you know what you've done? Do you know how long it will take to repair what your tongue destroyed in one night? She turned and walked away. Mrs. Ajibola sat frozen, her throat tight. That night, Mrs. Ajibola could not sleep. She lay in bed beside her husband, staring at the ceiling. The fan turned slowly above her, but it brought no relief. She replayed the scene over and over. Mrs. Olarewaju's face, the pain, the anger. And for the first time in her life, Mrs. Ajibola understood something. Words were not just air, they were stones. And once thrown, they could not be called back. She had always thought talking was harmless, a way to connect, a way to be part of the world. But now she saw the truth. Her words had weight. They traveled, they morphed, they wounded. How many times had she done this before? She thought of the neighbor she'd called owing woman, the pastor whose shoes she mocked, the friend whose private pain she'd shared at a party. Each memory was a small cut, but together they bled. She turned to her husband. Biodun? He stared. Am I a bad person? He opened his eyes, surprised. Why would you ask that? Because of what I did to the Olarewajus, because of everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat up and took her hand. You are not bad, Morenike, but you are careless. You talk without thinking, and in this world, carelessness can be just as dangerous as cruelty. She swallowed hard. What do I do? You learn, he said simply. You learn when to speak and when to be silent, and you start by making this right. The next few days were the hardest of Mrs. Ajibola's life. She tried to apologize to Mrs. Olarewaju. She went to their shop, but the door was locked and no one answered. She tried to explain to Mrs. Folake, who had trusted her, but Mrs. Folake would not take her calls. Customers stopped coming to her kiosk. The few who did were cut, transactional, no stories, no laughter, just business. The silence was deafening. Mrs. Ajibola, who had spent her whole life filling the air with words, now sat in a void of her own making. One evening, as she packed up her goods, a young girl, maybe 8 or 9, walked past and whispered to her friend, "That's Radio Ajibola. My mama said she destroys people with her mouth." The words cut deeper than any insult. That night, it rained. Not the usual Lagos rain that came and went. This was heavy, relentless, the kind that turned streets into rivers. Mrs. Ajibola sat in her compound, listening to the storm, and for the first time in years, she cried. Not because she was caught, but because she finally understood. She had spent so long talking that she never listened, not to her husband, not to the world, not even to herself. And now, when she needed words most, they failed her. There was no apology big enough, no explanation clear enough. All she had left was silence. And in that silence, she heard something. The voice of her grandmother, long gone, echoing from childhood. Ẹnu tó bá ń sọ̀rọ̀ láìro, yóò sọ orí rẹ̀ di wèrè. A mouth that speaks without wisdom will drive its own head to madness. The rain did not stop. By midnight, the river banks began to swell. By morning, water was creeping into homes. Ikorodu was flooding. People scrambled. Belongings were lifted onto tables. Children were moved to upper floors. The elderly were carried to higher ground. But in the chaos, there was confusion. Some streets were already blocked. Some families didn't know which route to take. Panic spread as fast as the water. Mrs. Ajibola stood at her window, watching the chaos. Her kiosk was half submerged, but she didn't care about goods anymore. She cared about the people. And then something shifted inside her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't think about herself. She thought about what needed to be said and why. She grabbed her wrapper, tied it tightly, and stepped into the rain. "Sister Bimpe, don't go that way. The bridge is flooded. Go through Alhaji's compound."
Uncle Tayo, take the children to the church. It's on higher ground. Mama Kike, your mother-in-law, she's still inside. Let me help you. Mrs. Ajibola moved from door to door, street to street. Her voice, the same voice that had spread gossip like fire, now spread warnings, directions, hope. She didn't speak to be heard. She spoke to help. And people listened, not because she was loud, but because she was right. Families made it to safety. Children stayed dry. The elderly were carried to the church before the water rose too high. By dawn, the rain slowed, the flood receded, and Ikorodu, battered but standing, began to breathe again. In the days that followed, something changed. People greeted Mrs. Ajibola again, not with laughter or mockery, but with respect. One afternoon, Mrs. Olarinwaju came to our kiosk. Mrs. Ajibola looked up, her heart pounding. Mrs. Olarinwaju stood quietly for a moment, then she spoke. I heard what you did during the flood. Mrs. Ajibola looked down. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing, Mrs. Olarinwaju said softly. You saved lives. My cousin's family, they made it out because of you. Mrs. Ajibola's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry for what I said, for what I caused. Mrs. Olarinwaju raised a hand. I know. She paused, then added, my grandmother used to say, má mọ ẹni tó tọ́, kí a tó mọ ẹni tó burú. We don't know who is good until we see who is bad. You were careless, but you are not wicked. And that night, you proved it. Mrs. Ajibola could barely speak. Thank you. Mrs. Olarinwaju nodded. We are rebuilding, slowly, and we forgive you. She turned to leave, then stopped. But Sister Morenike, yes. Next time, think before you talk. Mrs. Ajibola smiled through her tears. I will. From that day forward, Mrs. Ajibola became a different woman. She still talked, but she talked with purpose. She still shared stories, but she asked first, will this help or harm? The children no longer called her Radio Ajibola. Instead, the elders gave her a new name. Ẹni tó mọ ìgbà tó yẹ láti sọ̀rọ̀, the one who knows when to speak. And Mrs. Morenike Ajibola learnt what her grandmother had always known. A mouth can destroy, but when guided by wisdom, kindness, and intention, it can also protect, heal, and unite. That was the day her story truly began. In Yoruba tradition, we say, ohun tó bá ti inú ẹnu jáde kò lè padà wá. What comes out of the mouth cannot return. Words are like seeds. Once planted, they grow. And we cannot control the shape of the tree. Mrs. Ajibola's story reminds us that talking is not the same as communicating. Sharing is not the same as caring. And sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing when to stay silent. Because in silence, there is space for thought, for wisdom, for healing. And in that space, we find the truest version of ourselves. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to this channel for more African folktales that teach, inspire, and remind us of who we are. And in the comments below, tell us, where are you watching from? And what is one lesson you've learned the hard way?